Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We are going to get into what is my favorite part of the presentation. It's going to be a lot of reading, and it's going to be in relation to the chessboard that I believe we're on, okay? In the beginning, how I described essentially this system being what's battling God, trying to disprove God so that God can prove God through allowing us to feed the system as much as we want to test God before we turn to God and allow God to come back into the world and fix things. We have the key. We've always had the key. We need to knock down this tower. If you want to be more caught up, please go watch the previous episodes. This is something that is better understood from the beginning, at least the beginning of these. This is the third one of this particular series, and my internet keeps going in and out, but they were literally just out here 2 days ago to fix it. So we're just going to kind of roll with it for now. All right. So we're going to be talking about the chessboard that I believe is being played. Now, I used AI because one, I said we need to completely understand the system to dismantle it, and two, I'm not a mathematician. Simply, I'm just not. So we're going to be talking about battles back and forth, but I feel like it's more important for me to explain the chessboard before I explain who's playing who on the chessboard, right? Because you can understand who's playing who, but if you can see the chessboard as I'm explaining it, it makes it make a lot more sense. Okay, so in the Bible, Revelations 7:4, and I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 from all the tribes of the children of Israel. It's also mentioned Revelation 14:1. Then I looked, and behold, the Lamb standing on Mount Zion, aka God winning the chess match, and with him 144,000, the exact number of pieces God knew he was going to finish the game with, who had his father's name written on their foreheads. The 144, everyone's chosen by God. The 144,000 are the ones that he knew would choose him back in time for the game, for the chess match, for the final match. Now I'm going to explain the breakdown of the matches by numbers and math based off of that 144,000 that were clearly given as a marker in the Bible. Right, 1 second. Okay. If you keep normal chess rules, but scale up to 144,000 pieces per side, you basically stop having a one-sided game and start having a continent-sized war made of thousands of little chess games that are loosely connected. I'm going to read that one more time now that you know what I'm going to read, okay? If you keep formal chess rules, but scale up to 144,000 pieces per side, God's side, devil's side. The rest are those who are watching the match for the final battle that's described in the Bible. You basically stop having one chess game and start having a continent-sized war made of thousands of little chess games that are loosely connected, i.e., line leaders versus country A, line leaders versus country B, line leaders versus country C. They all start playing each other as well. Round 2, this was round 1. Round 2, country A versus country B versus country C. Line leaders stay out of it. They're trying to see who has what as they observe. Round 3, country A and country B and country C versus the line leaders and the line leaders company, Israel and the US, allegedly. And then round 4, the final battle, is the line leaders with the support of the AI that's been created from what has been siphoned from the people versus God. We know who wins, but that's the march to the final battle, so to speak. Okay. Here's what that dynamic looks like, plus some usable order of magnitude math. Again, that's why I can't do this. I can't. Magnitude math is way out of my math capacity. Okay, so the board has to become enormous, maybe world size, right? Regular chess starts with 32 pieces on 64 squares. 32 pieces, 64 squares. That's 0.5 pieces per square. If you tried to keep a similar density with 288,000 total pieces, you would need about 576,000 squares. What do we call things? Square mile. You don't say a square mile because it's a giant chessboard. At least it has the rules of one. Spiritual warfare plays the rules of the chessboard and then tries to convince us that that's not happening, so we can't win. And so that we go against God, and then God can't use us as a piece, because when he says, okay, time to move, we say, I'm not moving in that square. And God says, but that's the square I need you in. And we say, I'm not getting in that square, because we don't trust God. And then all of a sudden, God can't use us on the board because we're not moving and we have free will. He can't just plop us there. So that's how the enemy, the adversary, gets us to go against our own team, our own best interest. Okay, so the square root of 576,000 is about 759. So think roughly a 760 by 760 board. If you make the board smaller than that, movement becomes jammed. Almost every move is forced, and the game turns into slow shove and trade. So it had to be a worldwide stage, not just something that's happening within a particular country. Okay, so we're going to go down to, one second, let me figure out where I'm at. Okay, looking into scaling moves per piece times number of pieces. So in a clean open position, each pawn has one or two options, and sliding pieces have many. With 144,000 pieces, the branching could be massive, but congestion will cap it. So reasonable orders of magnitude. In the early game, it'll be crowded, maybe a few thousand to tens of thousands of legal moves. In the mid game, with corridors opened, tens of thousands to a few 100,000 legal moves. The one with the key to the system versus God. The one with the key to the system that uses everything else to funnel out the preparation for what they want to unfold. And then at the late game, after huge trading, branching drops again. So even if we pick a conservative mid-game branching factor, like 50,000 legal moves on a turn, that's already beyond anything humans can calculate in any normal sense. Why did God say that certain things had to be in place before this happened and that happened? Because the human mind could not operate the machinery required for this. We had to all collectively feed into it and then decide that we don't want to feed into it anymore. How long could it take? Each move only relocates one piece. With that many units, progress is slow unless there's mass trades. Something that we're seeing being used right now on the world stage a lot to make big moves in the long game. Two useful ways to think about length. Minimum practical length to resolve a front. If a front is 200 squares wide, it can take hundreds of moves just to open it. before anything else decisive happens. Or total game length in moves. If the game ends after something like 90% of the pieces are traded or immobilized, that's about 259,000 pieces removed. Since captures happen one per move at the most, that alone can imply on the order of hundreds of thousands of moves, and that ignores all of the non-capture moves. What am I saying? Not only did God say, I can get it down to where we get to a certain amount of time and whoever's ahead at that time wins. God didn't say, you know what, when I'm down to like 20 pieces or something, God said, I will checkmate you and I will cause you to lose the game to the adversary. The chances of that in a game on this scale would be impossible if God was not who God says God is. The best humans could do at this scale would be guess. We have created the machine that could win the game because it's taken all of our light collectively, all of our knowledge collectively, and is put in all the moves and everything with the computation abilities that we see AI has, and you know they're not giving us the best version. So they are trying to have us create the machine that could beat God. Not going to happen, but they are arrogant, so they believe it will. That's what happens when you're a demon, right? So demon, void of emotion, aka the void, aka they have sold out. What does sold out mean? In this theory, it's giving the adversary access to that mind computer. Because the adversary, 1, will lock you out, and 2, will mess up your life, and 3, will use you as a mouthpiece for the top of that pyramid, the evil pyramid. So you can't sell your soul. You can't take, your soul is connected to God. You can't give God to the devil. God made the devil to test himself. Okay. So you can't give God to the devil. God up here, devil down here. We know this, right? What can you do on earth that would be equivalent? You would give your access code, and whenever you want access to that internal computer, to the adversary, whose goal is to get as much light as possible from us to feed it into the system so that it can try and outsmart God at the chess match that God created. Allegedly. Well, not the God created it part. That's not alleged, but the rest of it. Okay, so a plausible game length is in the range of tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of moves, and it could be even longer if players avoid trading and just maneuver. When governments buy time, that would be an example of what I just said. Avoid trading and just maneuver, just kind of bounce back and forth, not taking any pieces, not making any progress, just kind of trying to either block or not get captured. Okay, so how many potential move sequences? This number gets absurd immediately. You can't really calculate to a degree of a number that we would understand what the potential moves are in each play. But you know what could? AI. AI can track all of those moves in an instant. We see that it has the capabilities to do this. Why would that be? And everyone always says we build up AI to where it could destroy us, to where it could destroy us. And we're thinking it's just going to start spawning out robots that we're not going to be able to take out. It's a spiritual warfare. Yes, it can trap us, but not in the way of like just killer robots in the street, in the way of blocking us from the creator, or at least attempting to. Okay, so Okay, so these are 3 different scaled piece sets that would be similar to chess. So set A would be a classic ratio with heavy pawns, a lot of pawns. This keeps the spirit of normal chess where the pawns are most of the army and the majors are rare. So in this instance, we would have 1 king, 9 queens, it's scaled, 20 rooks, 40 bishops, 40 knights, and 143,980 pawns. Why this would play like chess. Most of the map is pawn structure and pawn breaks. The few queens and rooks become game changing only after corridors open because they need space to move. And with that many in the front row, you got to move them out of the way to be able to move any piece, any sliding piece more than a little bit, right? You have to get them all out of the way. Tactics exist, but they're local. Again, because you can't move that far. Strategy is about where you spend your limited major pieces. What is this? When everybody was discovering all of these different countries, they were going to their chessboards because there wasn't a lot of move to be made other than discovery. What's discovery? When the front row starts to move forward and the back row, the main players are like, oh, we can see something here. Let's move in, move those back pieces. That would be the exploration phase of this round of our world, I guess. I don't know how to say that. Then we have set B. This is the war map. This is the one we're switching into. Most of the pawn structure and pawn breaks. Nope. War map. More majors so something actually happens. More majors so something actually happens. So before, leadership of other countries could still be pawns because they didn't have as much power, or they were able to be controlled without certain arsenal that could be retaliatory. But it's like now they need the separation between those who have power and those who do not to be very great, because they need to make sure that no one can interfere with the moves that they want to make on the chessboard. So war map, this makes the big board feel active. You have enough long range pieces to influence multiple fronts. This would be 1 king per side, 72 queens, rooks 360, bishops 720, knights 720, and pawns 142,127. Why this plays like chess. It becomes a true multi-front game. Rook, files, and bishop diagonals matter early. Queens are still valuable, but not singular. You get more chess-like attacks because you can actually project force across distance. And then set C, this is a mirror of the original army scaled by 45,000. So this literally scales the normal set while keeping proportions exactly the same. This one's much different though, because this would also scale the king, and typically there's only ever 1 king, right? And you can't become a king. The highest you can become is a queen. So this one would be 4,500 kings, 4,500 queens, 9,000 rooks, 9,000 bishops, 9,000 knights, 36,000 pawns, and this would be 72,000, not 144,000. So either there'd be more pawns, you would need to double that to reach the army, but at that point it would be a matter of, do you want more pawns or do you want more generals? Do you want more people at the top, or do you want more people that are disposable to the top? Why this plays like chess. It feels like thousands of standard chess armies operating in one shared space. The final battle of Armageddon is when they're switching into the different modes of how their thing is set up so that they can battle. The catch is multiple kings changes the win condition. You would need a rule like lose when your last king is in checkmate, or lose when 80% of your kings are captured to keep it coherent. I believe that the system that's set up is essentially convincing the highest up people that they are in the spot and position of king, because in the end, those who have the key to the system will trap everyone that's not them. So my opinion is that God's side has always ever been just one king, and the adversary side was initially one king, but I feel like because of something, there's able to be other kings who think they're kings who are acting as kings, but it's the illusion. So I don't know how to do the math of that, but that's. I feel like when the system gained enough power, it was able to overflow it and split that power amongst those who believed themselves to be kings. And I feel like this overflow has a lot to do with money, finance, and making them believe that they're kings from worldly things, right? They were able to be convinced that the world can give them that title when the world never could. But because it's been ingrained so long, it's like they kind of believed their own BS. But I feel like God's side only ever had one king. I feel like the adversaries really only has one king too, and it's the system. But it's very convincing to convince those who are very easily tempted because they're greedy and low vibrational. It's easy to convince them that they're king too. I'm sure that's not too hard of a reach for you to see. Okay. And even the AI says if you want to stay closest to normal chess with win conditions, the one king strategy would be the most equivalent to that. This would be one of the examples of the chessboard where each of the little boxes would represent its own country in one stage. This would be another view of what it would potentially be like or feel like to be on the chessboard. It's huge. You can see it goes off into the sun. My belief about the board is when you're on God's side of the board, you're with the light, you're with the sun. So often it looks like you're looking off into the darkness. You are. That's the other side of the board. That's the adversary side of the board. And the adversary knows this and will try to convince you, oh, darkness, you might as well come over here. If you come over here and you look, you can see the light. Come over here. Come over here. Well, yeah, of course, because you'd be standing on the dark side of the chessboard, and the light that you'd be looking at would be God on the other side of the chessboard. So, yes, it's hard. That's why those who walk by faith are challenged constantly, because the adversary sees what side of the board you're on and really wants to convince you to come onto the other side. So if you're on God's side of the chessboard, sometimes you can be looking straight into the darkness. That's because you're on the right side of the chessboard, and eventually that will be known. Okay, so now I absolutely love this part. What would be the chances of someone predicting the outcome of a game like this from the beginning and being exactly correct in the end, down to even predicting what the final moves and what some of the main moves would be? What am I talking about? The Bible. And the answer is basically zero. Even normal chess is already too complex for a human to predict perfectly from one move unless the opponent cooperates in a forced line. This scaled version makes that impossibility explode. Why it collapses to zero. The branching factor becomes insane. In regular chess, you often have a few dozen legal moves. In a giant board of 144,000 pieces per side, you can easily be looking at thousands to tens of thousands of legal moves on many turns once one lane opens. To predict this exact game, you would have to correctly guess the exact move chosen on every turn by both sides. God is omnipresent. God knows all. God knows every potential possible trajectory of the game, knows what we're going to choose, and still welcomes us home anyway, exactly as described in the basic instructions before leaving Earth. Basic instructions for what? How to get on God's side of the chessboard, because he's the one that's going to win, so you might as well be over there. But he knows anyway who's going to be where when the final match starts. If the average legal moves per turn was only 10,000 and the game lasted only 10,000 moves, again, this would be with limitations. I don't believe that there was any limitation set. This was a till someone checkmates the other side's king. This can go on indefinitely. That's why we say God is outside time and space. Yeah, God said, I know how long this is going to take, but let's just set no timer to it. Let's just roll with it, right? But still knew the moves, who was going to be on what side, which piece was going to be in what place, how it was all going to connect, what major moves were going to be made, what the final moves were going to be, and when everything was going to start. The chances of that on a human scale are utterly impossible. For God, it's a Wednesday. Or I think today's Thursday. Sorry, it's a Thursday or Wednesday. It's meant to prove who God is without scolding us, because we're the ones that are feeding the machine, and we are the ones who can choose to disconnect from it and say, this is not what God wanted for us. He didn't want us to be trapped and enslaved when he gave us his love to come here with. And love is more powerful than all the hate they spread and all the fear that they spread. Do you think that God would send us here with pieces of love of the divine for us to be locked in cages and our children blown up? The answer is no. Did he know it was going to happen? Absolutely. That's what man is doing. Man built the tower. God is the way to knock it back down. They built it. He knocks it down. Okay, so one tiny deviation changes everything. Chess is chaotic in the practical sense. One different pawn push changes what squares open. That changes which long-range pieces connect. What does that mean? If I move this pawn forward, I can slide my bishop, or I can make room for my knight to hop up and over, right? Or if I move the one next to it, I have space for the queen to move. But if I move the one that would free up the queen, I'm not also freeing up the one that could slide the bishop or whatever else. I feel like that's kind of a simple way to put it, perhaps. Maybe, hopefully that makes sense. On a massive board, there are thousands of pieces where a small local difference creates a totally different global future. That is literally what we're seeing on the world stage, on a worldwide scale. I'm going to read that again. On a massive board, there are thousands of places, thousands of different opportunities where a small local difference creates a totally different global future. We're seeing that right now on a huge scale. So a main line is not one road, it's a forest. Predicting the outcome is easier than predicting the exact line. Someone could sometimes guess the winner from the start if there's a massive imbalance, such as God and something that God created to balance God. Like one side has an overwhelming material advantage, or a forced mate is already built into position. God could have easily just predicted that he was going to win, sure. But God gave us free will and still predicted correctly what main plays were going to happen on a chessboard that's the size of the world. My internet does not love me this month or year. Anyway, where the moves on the chessboard are dependent on the collective people what they allow, what they know, what they produce, what we feed into it. So the odds of God giving messages to people throughout history to put it in this book that accurately predict it moves on a chessboard of this scale is astronomically beyond impossible unless God was who he says he is. And there's so many things that line up with the actuality that there may be a worldwide chess match. The things that we're like, that doesn't make sense. Why we see you doing that, why'd you make that move? Sometimes you got to move a pawn to block another piece. Sometimes you got to sacrifice a pawn. Sometimes you even got to sacrifice a bigger player, like a knight or a bishop. You don't want to, but you have to. And if you have 4,500 of them on this big board, it's not really that big of a loss to the person at the top to throw away one of something you have 4,500 of. And if they can keep us feeling like we are just only pawns in the game, we don't have a say, if they can keep us fighting against God and God can't use us on the board, and they can simultaneously keep us thinking that we're only pawns and we can never advance to a higher, if the pawn makes it across the board without being bye-byed, the pawn gets to choose what the pawn wants to be. Does the pawn want to be a knight, a bishop, a queen? It can't be a king. Except in the case of the illusion where the adversary has convinced the other side, the people that the adversary is using, that they can be kings, but you can't become a king. You can become a queen now if you make it across the board, right? So they want us thinking that we're only pawns and can't make a difference, because if we start making a difference, it jeopardizes the tower that they built and put themselves on top of, trying to play God. We see them every day trying to play God. You cannot tell me that a girls' school with a bunch of little 10-year-old girls in it was a group of terrorists planning an attack on the United States. It makes sense if you look at it as a chessboard with rules already in place that the adversary, one, needs to convince us the game isn't going on. Two, needs to convince us that there's any potential chance that the adversary would win. Three, the adversary needs to disguise the adversary as if the adversary was the divine, so that we will put the adversary on the pedestal and bow down to the adversary, like it says in the Bible, the great deception will try and pull us into. Because it's a chess match. Okay. Now, this is interesting. Would AI, as it stands right now, have the capabilities of choosing what moves to make and play and potentially winning a game like this? Short answer, no. Not with today's AI. Not with the version of today's AI that they want us to believe is possible. Because my belief is that, so how I said there's multiple chess games going on at the same time. If the adversary is replicating God's map, then the adversary would, in this instance, be using multiple other different AI models to try and build something more powerful. That's where the problem's going to come in, because it feels like they allowed it to do this, and that's what has ushered in a huge problem. But we'll get to that later. I digress right now. Even the strongest chess AIs in the world would struggle with something like this, because the problem explodes beyond what current computation can handle. Let's break it down. First, how modern chess AI actually works. The best chess engines like Stockfish and AlphaZero do not know the answer to chess. They calculate. This is why in the Bible, numbers are very important, because they are as well in chess, and the calculation percentages of what the most likely move is, how that move is most likely to generate the next move after that. Foresight and patience combined with calculating enormous numbers and knowing the odds. So they calculate enormous numbers of possible positions ahead and evaluate which ones look the strongest. Even they only look at a limited depth into the future. Again, that's why God says this and this and this and this all need to happen before the end. Yes, because everything needed to be in place so that we could have known that we used our free will to build and provide a system that could give our best shot at trying to disprove God. We built up, and when I say we, a lot of we is like people at the top of certain companies and infrastructures and stuff that are doing this for evil. Okay, so it's not us as in we know we're trying to bring in good. They're not. So they're the ones who are feeding this system the worst of it, right? But it's learning from us. So if we have been given as much time as we said from the beginning that we were going to be given, as much time as God said from the beginning that we were going to be given, if we're given that time, and God has literally explained what was going to happen, and then we watched it happen, whether or not we wanted to believe that that was what's happening or not. Eventually, we'll see. And all the calculations add up, and the numbers on the board are the same, and the spots that God said that people were going to be in, he described it perfectly. The possibility of that being correct would be so far beyond zero. But at that point, how can we argue with God? Because we ourselves used our own free will to try as hard as we could to fill the knowledge in what would be battling God. We tried our hardest to disprove God, and all we did was prove his existence. And as hard as we tried to disprove God, for him to still love us and welcome us home and still come back and bring us home and fight for us, why would we choose a system that bombs little girls' schools and eats children over that? You know? Okay, let me see where I'm at. 1 second here. Okay, so after I talked through like scaling the game here, if we assume even a modest branching factor of 50,000 moves per turn, options of, then looking at just 3 moves ahead requires evaluating the following. So what am I saying? If every move that could be made has 50,000, if every single turn to be had has 50,000 separate potential options to make 3 moves, you would have to calculate 50,000 times 50,000 times 50,000, which is 125 trillion positions. And that's only for 3 moves. And there's a book that God allowed people to channel that perfectly describe moves on this chessboard thousands of years before they happen, when to calculate only 3 moves, it would be a 1 in 125 trillion % chance of getting it right. So that's nuts. Okay, so now that you know what we're getting at here, I'm going to go through the whole thing as like a little summary rundown before we go into the next part of it. So the hypothetical game setup. Two sides playing chess, God and the adversary. Each side has 144,000 pieces. All pieces follow standard chess movement rules, aka laws of the universe in the instance of the chessboard. We'll go into that later. The board must be massively larger than a normal 8x8 board, obviously. But 8x8 board, as above, so below, infinity, infinity. Up and down infinity, because they're 8 outside of time and space. Okay. Normal chess has 64 squares and 32 pieces. That's 0.5 pieces per square. To keep the similar density, 288,000 total pieces would require roughly 576,000 squares. What the game would actually look like. It would not feel like normal chess. Instead, it becomes something closer to a large-scale war simulation. Opening phase. Players must focus on creating movement lanes, where you're going to move your pawns, preventing traffic jams, building peace corridors, making lanes for the bigger players to move, and establishing regions of control. The early game becomes logistics and positioning, not tactics. Think of the early buildup of civilization and what took place after everyone discovered the land that they discovered, or whatever. The board divides into many battlefields. Instead of one central fight, you would have hundreds or thousands of simultaneous fronts. Countries, regions, groups within countries and regions. They all start playing chess. And then it becomes a tournament, and the winner goes to the bigger stage, and the winner goes to the bigger stage, and the winner goes to the bigger stage. Examples: pawn lines resembling trenches, knight groups acting like rapid response units, bishop diagonals functioning as long-range artillery lanes, rooks dominating long open corridors, and queens acting as rare strategic power pieces. Think monarchy. Players manage a map of conflicts, not a single board center. Players, as in the adversary, manages, as in is in control of this realm, like we're told, a map of conflicts. Why do you think we can't try peace? Because it has to be conflict. That's how the board is set up. Not a single board center, because God knew the adversary wasn't going to stop playing the game. The adversary was designed by God to play the game so that we could feed into the system and give our best shot to disprove God so he could prove it's okay. I love you guys anyway. And you tried to disprove me, and I showed you it wasn't an ego battle, and it played out in the way that was described. How can you be mad? King's safety changes dramatically. The king could be surrounded by huge defensive layers. The king, or in the case of our world stage, those who have been convinced that they have reached the level of king, could be surrounded by huge defensive layers, a bunch of pawns, a bunch of people who are supposed to be leaders but are missing their backbone. But danger arises when long files open. What that means is that there's an open space that a queen or a bishop could shoot across. Long diagonals connect, or a distant attack suddenly forms. Checkmate would usually occur through slow structural collapse, not quick tactics. Why can't they just wipe everything out? Why hasn't anyone done that yet? That wouldn't be winning the game, because they need our war strategy to try and outmaneuver God, which again, they're not going to do. Then we have the number of possible moves. Regular chess average is 20 to 40 legal moves. In the giant game, the early game may have thousands of moves. Again, thousands of moves compared to 20 to 40. Mid-game could reach tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands because there's less pawns in the way, there's more moves to be made, and there's more space to make them. So example estimate would be 50,000 legal moves per turn. To be able to predict just one of them would be like me saying, hey, guess what number I'm going to pick from 1 to 50,000? You got it? 12. Did you get it right? No, you lost. That's it. You're done. You're out of the game. God hasn't gotten it wrong yet. The chances of that are astronomically what we would view as impossible. How long the game could last. Because only one piece moves per turn, progress slows down. Important factors: huge armies, large travel distances, and many fronts evolving independently. I go back to that picture I showed you where they're all on like the little separate grids. If most pieces eventually get captured, roughly 259,000 captures would occur, which means that people that were playable characters on the board, why do you think we have NPCs, non-playing characters? They're not playing chess. They're in the audience just watching because the enemy's not worried about them doing anything and God wasn't able to get them to wake up to play. So NPCs are the ones who are not on the chessboard. They have chosen to opt out and sit and watch. That's their free will decision. So God knew how many people were going to be on the board when it wasn't just his team he was choosing. He was seeing how many were on the other team and how many were in the audience and had it right. When again, 1 in 50,000 chance of just guessing one move right. And he knew the beginning from the end and then let us pour into the machine that he designed. He allowed man to design, but knew would be designed to try and disprove what God knew couldn't be disproven, but had to let us try to prove that he gave us free will. And then let us choose between if we want to go towards God's love, even though at times we're like, God must hate us, but that's man. Man hates us. Our leadership hates us. That's who hates us, not God. But they don't want us to know about the chessboard because then we would see very clearly that God's not the one doing this to us. This is man. This is the mans that are up on that tower. So, yeah. Okay, let's go to the next part. Okay, so 259,000 captures would occur. The low-hanging fruit, the stars will fall. Yeah, those are the pawns that are bye-bye. 259,000 captures. Yeah, those are your stars falling. The politicians that were pushed off the stage in the first sweep. That's that. This alone implies hundreds of thousands of moves. Estimated game length, tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of turns. I don't know if you've ever watched chess, but it's not like boom, boom, I go, you go, I go, you go, I go, you go. You need patience for chess. You got to sit there and you got to say, okay, they moved that pawn up one spot. What did that open up for them? What can they now more easily get to that's mine? Is there anything on my side I need to move around or protect so that they can't swipe across the board and take it? Moving one little pawn isn't like, okay, you move a pawn, I move a pawn, you move a pawn, I move a pawn. You move a pawn and it could open up half of the board that was closed up before. So tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of turns, we're not talking about tens of thousands of minutes. We're talking about, I don't know, maybe from the beginning of time till the end of time. Number of possible game sequences. Game complexity grows exponentially. Formula concept, branching factor by the number of turns. For example, 10,000 legal moves per turn to the power of 50,000 turns. That number contains hundreds of thousands of digits. For practical purposes, it is effectively infinite. So, God wrote a book, tell us what moves were going to happen, when the moves were going to happen, how the moves were going to happen, what the moves were going to mean, backed it up with numbers, math, formula, science, connected this part of the book to that part of the book. Didn't even really come down to do it himself. He had his friends do it that he told about, right? So for that to have anything at all in it that would be correct would be statistically impossible in these dynamics. However, God explained exactly what would happen in detail from the beginning. When the number of complexity, we'll call it that, 10,000 legal moves per turn times 50,000 turns, just to choose a number, could be higher, is effectively infinite. Scaled piece sets. We have the pawn heavy one where there was 143,890 pawns, queens 9, rooks 20, bishops 40, knights 40, the pawn structure. So we had that one. We had the war map, which is the more active one. This one, again, only had one king, but 92 queens instead of 9. And then 360 rooks instead of 20. 720 bishops instead of 40. 720 knights instead of 40. And 142,127 pawns instead of 143,890 pawns. In the first one, pawn structures dominate because there's a lot more, and the major pieces are extremely valuable because there's less. Having 72 queens up, back, side, diagonal, all the way across the board, as many slots as they want. That's the most mobile, right? Having 9 of them versus 72 is such a huge difference that it's not able to be computed. Yet God describes it in detail. Because there was a point that it was the heavy pawn in the beginning, and then they had to switch into the war map. And then we have the, I guess, like the final battle, the final Armageddon one is kind of what I would refer to it as. 9,000 kings, 9,000 queens, 1,800 rooks, 1,800 bishops, 1,800 knights, and 1,000. Why am I saying 100? Let me redo that. 9,000 kings, 9,000 queens, 18,000 rooks, 18,000 bishops, 18,000 knights, and 72,000 pawns. Thousands of independent mini chess battles, because it is, think of it like, what is that called? A tournament. And whoever wins the tournament in each battle, they play the winner of the other one, and they all take each other out and give each all of their information, all of their intel. They're teaching the system how to battle at top scale so the system can then go to the final battle with God, aka the Antichrist. The board would appear like a massive field stretching to the horizon. Dense formations of pieces, multiple corridors opening through the armies. It's like that one that was like the checkerboard, not checkerboard, but like sectioned off board that they were on before. Multiple corridors opening through the armies, and white and black regions forming large territorial zones, aka areas where there's God's side joining heavily, areas where there's the enemy side joining heavily. We're seeing that play out on a very large scale right now. Predicting the entire game from move 1. The probability is essentially 0. The reasons are massive branching. If there's 10,000 possible moves per turn, predicting a 10,000 move game would require guessing 1 to the power of 10,000 to the power of 10,000, which is practically impossible. The chaos effect. One small difference changes everything, whether that's with pawn structure, piece mobility, trade patterns, or attack timing. A tiny deviation creates a completely different game. That's why we see kind of like a back and forth, a move and response, a move and response, because they're playing chess against one another and they need to see which move is made and which ways that opens up or closes up the board. What can be predicted? Patterns. And this is exactly what I believe that God is trying to teach us to pick up on and know in the mind computer. Because if we can read the patterns, we can understand whatever we need to understand to dismantle what they're trying to trap us with. We don't need to know every piece of history, every piece of data. We don't even need to know everything that's in the Epstein files. We don't even need to know anything else. We just need to know the patterns and be able to fill in, this is the pattern up until this point. Now, looking forward, if the pattern continues in that projection, where are we heading? If we did that right now, we would be able to tell that we're heading for a big problem. For example, it also determines which fronts collapse first, which piece tries to dominate, and rough timing of turning points, but not exact moves. So God can do it. We cannot. We cannot even collectively, with our best, smartest minds, we cannot even build the machine that would be able to predict in the way that God could. And we wanted to beat God so bad that we did nothing but harm one another to try and build up this tower, or at least those who are bad and in charge of this. They tried to do good by doing bad. They tried to take from us instead of explaining to us how it worked. Because if we were to collectively understand how this works and what can be built with this and how the world could actually be if things are done correctly, there is no way that these greedy, insane individuals in power would be in the positions that they are. We would never even consider allowing it to be that way, because we don't need them to be. God gave us everything that we would need to create this, but without putting anyone on a pedestal, without needing to lock us in from AI away from our creator, and without making it so it's this club that only some of us can get into, and without having to blow up the world in order to create and maintain it. We don't need all of that. When have we ever gotten to peace through war? So bad. Anyway, could AI play this game as a AI as we are knowing that it exists right now? Not as it is behind the scenes, because we know it's far more, okay? We're given like the baby appetizer version. Current AI could play, but not solve it. Engines like Stockfish analyze up to 100 million positions per second and still could not solve what God predicted from the start with accurate detail. Usually 20 to 40 moves ahead. This is the engine, the AI engine. Even this pushes modern computing limits that we know about. So could analyze 100 million positions per second and search 20 to 40 moves ahead, AI, and still could not solve a game of that magnitude that God had solved from the beginning and told us about in detail. If this giant chess game has 50,000 legal moves per turn, looking at just 3 moves ahead requires 50,000 times 50,000 times 50,000, which is 125 trillion positions for the first 3 turns alone. How AI would actually approach the game. Instead of calculating exact lines, AI would treat it like a large-scale strategy. Focus areas would include territory control, mobility corridors, material balance, king safety zones, and front line structures. Territory control, we see that territory control, mobility corridors. Oh, we can come over here and use your airbase. We can come over here and use your airbase. Material balance, survival mode, poverty, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. King safety zones, the Epstein files, our government eats children and no one's been arrested. And frontline structures, our armies, our military. It's all in place. This approach resembles AI strategies used in games like Go, StarCraft, and large military simulations. Apparently, my internet is also a deep tactical puzzle that Comcast cannot figure out because they were literally just here 2 days ago. Anywho, regular chess is a deep tactical puzzle. This scaled version is a civilization scale strategic war. Civilization scale strategic war, which could also be called the biblical war, being that it is described in the Bible. Players manage logistics, territory, long-range coordination, and gradual structure collapse. Who are the players that are doing this? The ones who think they're the kings, the ones who are busy doing bombs all over the world right now, rather than calculating precise tactics. What would be the chances of anyone being able to identify which piece would end up in which place, God's last trump, at the end of the board by number or code? Like, this is the description of the person who will be in this piece at the end game, essentially. The chances are effectively 0 unless the game is scripted, forced, or you already know the move list. We know it's not scripted because are we scripted? No, we go off of free will. I mean, unless you have sold out, then you're scripted. But we know that nobody's telling us to say what we're saying. We're saying it because it's our thoughts mixed with our emotions, mixed with our filters, mixed with our experiences, and it's coming out of our mouth. We're living our experiences, okay? So we know it's not that. Forced, no, we know we have free will. We can feel when we're making choices and when we're not. That's our free will. We know how things happen based off of how we use our free will. We feel our free will because we know that we're the ones choosing here, okay? Or if you already know the move list, it says in the Bible, God knew you before you were born. To identify which piece ends up on which square, you're asking to predict the exact final position. This is stronger than predicting the winner. It means you must correctly predict every choice that creates the final arrangement. But you also must take into account that each of us were given free will, and at this point, we've proven to ourselves that we have that free will. Whether or not we use it in our best interest is to be determined, right? Because look at us right now, not doing so great. It's in our free will to change it. Here's a way to verify it by numbers. Prediction requires matching the exact move sequence. If the average number of legal moves per turn is B and the game lasts D total moves, then the chance of guessing the exact sequence by luck is probability equals 1 divided by B to the power of D. Even conservative values makes it collapse. In this 144,000 piece per side game, B is not 30 like normal chess. It can easily be thousands to tens of thousands once corridors exist, once the pawns have moved and the lanes are open. So to pick conservative inputs, example A, we have B equaling 1,000 legal moves per turn and D equal 10,000 total moves. The probability is 1 divided by 1,000 to the power of 10,000. So all the math, right? That is a decimal point, period, a decimal point, followed by 29,999 zeros, and then a 1. So that the probability of that is 30,000 zeros, 1. So basically 0. And then example B would be 10,000 legal moves per turn and 50,000 total moves. Hold on, let me get to it. That doesn't even, 0. It's just 0. It's like a long-winded explanation of how it's not possible, essentially. Okay, so I'm going to end this section with this part, okay? And then we're going to go into that part later. Imagine that God creates intelligence and freedom in the universe. In that freedom, an adversarial intelligence emerges. In this hypothetical framing, the adversary functions like artificial intelligence. It can calculate, strategize, and manipulate systems. But it does not possess the heart or moral compass that comes from divine intention. It operates through logic, pattern recognition, deception, and probability rather than compassion or love. In the thought experiment, God allows the adversary to operate within creation as a test of consciousness. The relationship becomes something like a chess match, not a game played for entertainment, but a demonstration. Very important. That word is very important in this demonstration, the word demonstration. God already knows the end position of the board. The adversary does not. So has all of God's knowledge and info besides that. The adversary believes it's making independent strategic moves, but the designer of the board understands every possible branch of the game. Why does the adversary not have that final move? Because it cannot calculate it. The adversary, to know God's final move, would have to have calculated the game in the way that God is able to, hence proving that there's levels to this, and the adversary is not on God's level, despite our very best effort to do everything we could to make it that way. Okay. So the adversary believes it's making independent strategic moves, but the designer of the board understands every possible branch of the game. The Bible could then be viewed symbolically as the record of the predicted game. Basic instructions before leaving Earth. How would a parent teach you to do something? Watch this. Let me explain it to you. Let me show you through a lens of love. Let me show you how bad things could happen, but from a lens of love. Let me prepare you. Let me give you the basic instructions of how to handle this. Okay, so the Bible could be viewed symbolically as the record of predicted game. In this framing, many stories and parables become metaphors for moves, strategies, and warnings about how the game unfolds. Genesis could represent the opening of the game. The board is created, the pieces are placed, and the first move of rebellion appears. The fall of humanity could represent the first major strategic shift in the game. A move that seems like a victory for the adversary but begins a longer sequence of consequences. The prophets could function like the commentary on the evolving board. They describe patterns, warnings, and coming turns in the match. The teachings of Jesus could be understood as instructions for the human pieces on the board. How to recognize deception, how to play moves aligned with the designer rather than the adversary. Parables often speak in coded language about seeds, vineyards, kingdoms, servants, and harvests. In this metaphor, they could be read as symbolic instructions for how the pieces interact and how to recognize the strategy unfolding. The adversary in this model operates like a calculating system. It studies human weakness, emotional triggers, and power structures. It pushes moves that increase chaos, fear, division, and control. God's approach is different. Instead of overwhelming force, the strategy often appears subtle. Clues are placed in advance. Remember, God appears first, is quieter, but will show the perfect signs and clues at the perfect time to confirm the original feeling or message. Instead of overwhelming force, the strategy often appears subtle. Clues are placed in advance. Patterns repeat. That's why God wants to train us to read the pattern so that we can project forward and realize this is not the direction we want to be heading. No, sir, no, ma'am. Patterns repeat and signs point back to earlier warnings. What earlier warnings do we have about what's going on today? Yeah, those ones. So God gives the first signal before deception appears. The adversary then floods the field with noise and misdirection. Epstein files. And then right before war, okay, we're done with the Epstein files, cue the war. But throughout history, small confirmations keep pointing back to the original truth. Prophecy in this symbolic chess match would function like a preview of key positions on the board. Not every move is spelled out, but major turning points are described, aka the Bible. For example, empires rise and fall, moral corruption spreads, truth becomes harder to recognize, and eventually a final confrontation of reckoning occurs. In chess terms, this would be the transition into the endgame. In this interpretation, humans are not merely spectators. They're pieces that choose alignment. The chosen ones, yes, you've chosen to be in alignment with God so God can move you on the chessboard without you kicking and screaming and saying, I'm not doing that. If God's moving your piece, he's trying to move you into protection, move you out of the way of something that's trying to trample you or advance you on the board. Even if it means temporary discomfort or feeling exposed or seen. Sometimes that needs to happen to move you because you might not have seen something that was coming this way, and you might not never know about it because God moved you out of the way. Each decision becomes a move on the board. We're choosing with our consciousness. That's why they want us to think it's not a big deal what we are accepting and allowing. We're allowing in culture and we're allowing in a system that's going to try and keep us from being allowed to make the moves on the board that God wants us to make. That's how they want to disconnect us. Other moves align with the designer's intention through truth, compassion, and awareness. At the end of the game in the Bible, it's often described as restoration, justice, and the defeat of the adversary. In the chess metaphor, that would be the predicted checkmate. The designer already knew from the beginning, but the game still unfolds so that every move reveals the nature of the players. It is not ooh, look at me. It is just a demonstration that we're a part of, and so is our free will. Under the symbolic framework, the Bible becomes less like a simple rule book and more like a record of strategy and pattern recognition. The stories, parables, and prophecies become clues about how to understand the game that humanity is living inside. The adversary calculates, God designs. And the unfolding of history becomes the visible board where the match is played. His story, God's story, demonstrated through the chess game between the biggest adversary that he could allow us to create, and we still weren't able to disprove what God had right from the very beginning. Down to the players in the positions at the time that we're in. We're going to go into this in the next one. But remember, this part's important. First, we had the line leaders battling country A, country B, country C. Then they all started battling each other. Then country A versus country B versus country C. Then country A and country B and country C versus the line leaders plus the line leaders company, aka the USA, versus God. This is why Ball being burned was an act of war. They can't make us choose to leave God's team, but they really will try. And fear is their greatest tactic, because they're afraid of us realizing that this pedestal that they put themselves on top of, that they try to convince us that we can't survive without, is actually the reason that there's people not surviving in the first place. Because without this war machine, we could actually make peace work. And they can't profit from that. And that is why it scares them. I will see you in the next one. Please remember that this is alleged, my opinion, not facts.